Hello, welcome to episode 845. This is a pre-record because we are currently in Berlin at Superbooth. I would thoroughly recommend you head over there and check out our forthcoming video content. There's a whole bunch of stuff coming. Before I get into our guests, I just want to say, please join our Patreon. And here's a quick message. It's 2025 and our Patreon keeps getting better thanks to our supporters. Thank you so much. There's ad-free versions of much of what we post on YouTube, SonicTALK pre-show, Sonic Lab extra videos, the ever-expanding Sonicstate archives, including classics like the top 20 greatest samplers. There's Patreon Discord, a monthly hangout, the excellent members map, impulse responses from classic and unusual reverbs, and a growing collection of patches and samples in decent sampler format, including some great Moog Muse samples. In fact, the music you're listening to now by Paulie Boat was made using our sample sets. So why not consider supporting us and keep us doing what we do? Head over to patreon.com/Sonicstate. Hello everybody, welcome to this Sonic Talk special. Very pleased to have guest Eric Drass. You're hearing and watching some of his work. This is called You Bet, and it's a kind of disturbing use of generative AI. I'm not quite sure how to describe you, Eric. It seems to be an ever-increasing list of skills and sort of interests and artistic endeavours. So I've got fine artist with mixed media, painting, digital media, video, generative AI, audio, musician, art installation, public speaker. I mean, there's so many strings to your bow. Is that do you find your business card is having to turn into something A4 now rather than a small, discrete little piece of card?
I have a short attention span, I think is the answer. I'm interested in lots of things, and the secret of being a successful artist is to pick one thing and to do it 100,000 times, and I've never been very good at that. I'd rather make something interesting and new, and I'm interested in lots of different things. So, do you think that's the case? I mean, I wonder. I mean, yes, I think maybe doing any form of creative process multiple times will give you an insight into how to. It's like, once you know how to use a hammer, then you can use it for all sorts of things. You know what I mean? It's like a muscle that you exercise. You don't necessarily have to be a specialist. I think it's more. There's two sides to that. There's doing something over and over again to improve your practice, and the other side of it is doing something over and over again so that people know what it is that you do. And certainly in the fine art painting world, the people who do best end up painting lots of versions of the more or less the same thing because people have liked it. And I mean, it's true in musicians as well, right? You follow musicians because they have a particular sound that you like. If they changed all the time, you wouldn't be so attentive to them.
That's a really interesting sort of creative dilemma, isn't it, in many ways? Because obviously, I mean, I've been through this process personally, where, I used to do remixes, and after a while of doing the same kind of thing, because that's what people hired you for, you just get a bit jaded and sort of sick of it, and you want to do something else, but that's not what people want. And it must be the same for musicians who are still playing their hits from the 80s, because that's what the audience want, whereas they've been maybe down a whole multitude of different routes since then that they're perhaps more proud of, but nobody wants that.
No, I mean, it's the tension between popularity and experimentation, I think, and I'm sure that's true in a lot of music. I think we're going to get onto AI in a bit, but I mean that's part of what's going on. Really, is this tendency towards the norm, and I think
it's interesting, isn't it? I think conservatives with a small c does apply to the creative arts, and it's not necessarily because we're not into unusual stuff. It's just we know what we like and we like what we know, and also if it's down to us performing and the stresses and strains around having to be on, in front of an audience or to perform a particular kind of work, we like to have everything just so, or most of us do. Some of us thrive on the chaos, but most of us like to sort of know where everything is and how it's going to be, which does inevitably lead to perhaps a sort of a comfortable middleness that perhaps we should try and fight against, maybe.
I don't know. I mean, you know, musicians becoming popular, you have to play a lot of gigs to a lot of people, and then people say, hey, you like this band, they sound a bit like this other band, you should go and see them. And they expect to see the same thing, right? If a band played a different set every night, they would never get an audience. So there is a desire for familiarity and a staying within certain implicit bounds, I think, in creativity, be it music or fine art, is that people expect to go to a show and see more or less the thing they've heard on the record. You know, otherwise you're in Spinal Tap. You know, this is our jazz fusion. You know, kind of vibe,
maybe
right?
so. Well, okay, right. We seem to have sort of leapfrogged over an enormous number of questions I was going to ask you, but so initially, I mean, you know, you have the Eric Drass persona, which is the fine artist, which is perhaps the speaker, and the music, which is you go under the name Drass, and sort of video projects, but also something called Shardcore, which is that another entity, or does that encompass all of those things?
So this actually goes back to my musical roots, which is fitting for this podcast. So in my old band, I used to have a stage name of Senior Hardcore, because we were a hardcore band, which you abbreviate in Spanish to S.hardcore. And so when the internet blew up and everyone made up names, I picked up the name Shardcore because I was using it a bit anyway. And that's all very well until you meet people in person and go, hi, my name's Shardcore. And they go, you're an idiot. You've got a stupid name. So I had to kind of revert to using well, you know what I mean. It's like there's a bit of eye rolling, whether implicit or explicit, about using online handles in reality.
Right. Yeah, I see what you mean.
So the shardcore.org domain I bought 25 years ago, and I use it as a repository for pretty much everything that I do. So
right.
I actually just built a bot for Blue Sky that's posting everything from the beginning just to see it again. It's about up to 2006 now. So every day at 8:23 in the morning, you get a new post from shardcore.org. And it's fascinating to me just to sort of look back at all the various things I've done. It's currently in the early stages of me learning to paint at the moment.
Right. Well, I suppose, I mean, in many ways, that's a sort of that's an introduction into, you know, so you're using kind of essentially automation and computer technology and current sort of social norms, social media to kind of represent your work and you know, it makes total sense. And so I suppose that brings us on to perhaps some of the other things that you're known for, which is where I sort of came in, where Chris Midiera mentioned to me. So, you know, you've been speaking on the subject of AI and generative AI as it sort of refers to the artist. And obviously, you know, in the current world, everybody's kind of terrified. They just think the robots are taking over and everything's slop and all of those things. And I was listening to your recent speech, which was AI and the artist from the RI, which I thought had some really fascinating points. So, I mean, as an artist, you're kind of bridging the gap. So, I mean, I understand that I'm not expecting you to kind of be, you're not the ambassador for AI, but you have some very interesting points to make on the subject, which I think is well worth discussing.
Yeah. So, I guess if we go back in time, historically, I've always been a computer geek ever since I got my X81 in the 80s. Always been interested in technology, had a career in technology. But I found that my ego didn't like the fact that computer code gets turned off. So you can spend a long time building something beautiful, and then the business or whatever will disappear, and there's no evidence of your effort. And so at the age of 33, I decided to start taking up painting again. I decided to make 33 works of art in my 33rd year as a challenge to myself, because I was forever sort of starting things and not quite finishing them. And so I started by painting one day a week, and then I'd paint something and I'd list it on eBay and get it out of my house to force myself to finish. So it was a kind of reaction to technology, was like, get away from the computer, go and do something visual. But also as a kind of method of training myself into completing things. So I think I managed, I don't know, 27 rather out of 33. I didn't quite make 33 in my 33
Well, fair play. I mean, it's a very good effort.
But it totally kickstarted, you know, my desire to create things that weren't specifically technology based. So I spent a lot of years painting and doing a bit of music, and then I got involved with a fellow artist here in Brighton and we were doing installation work. And one of the installations we did in 2009 were giant Japanese fortune cats. You know, the ones that
the ones that do that. Yeah.
We built 2 of those and placed them in the middle of Brighton for an art installation, and people could go and talk to them. So they had these telephones. You could walk up to the cat, pick up the phone, and speak to someone, and the cat would answer and wave its arm. And the problem we had is that we had actors hidden away who were answering it, but they needed to think on their feet pretty fast. So one of the things that we wanted to do was have a kind of collection of aphorisms and sayings that they could pull on. And to do that, we'd kind of very quickly classify. You know, if someone would come up and say, "Oh, I've had this problem with my girlfriend," you could push the love button and it would give you a random sample of things that the cat could potentially say. So all of a sudden I was bringing back my tech chops to solve an artistic problem. And then around that same time, I started playing with Twitter bots and stuff as well. So I kind of came full circle and ended up using my tech skills artistically, having spent a few years just painting things to get away from the tech. And so yeah, I was doing quite a lot of sort of generative stuff, but less visual, I'd say, more about commentary on the nature of data as material and social networks as stuff to be played with. So I did a lot of that kind of thing. And then when Google Deep Dream appeared in 2015, 2016, which is the first sort of neural network based image generator, which Google made by turning one of their image classifiers upside down. So you can feed stuff in and ask the machine what it thinks it sees. And it produces these incredible...
And it was that cats and dogs and stuff that it was trained on.
Puppy slugs
all of that
thing,
stuff.
Yeah.
Puppy slugs, that's right. I've heard about that, yeah.
Yeah. So that was obviously very exciting visually, but also my PhD back in the 90s was in neural networks. So I was kind of familiar with the technology. So it was quite exciting. And so as a result, I kind of kept on top of what was happening in AI and went through the whole GAN period. And then 2019 was when Clip turned up and people started prompting for images, and now you can type in words and get pictures. And that was I think that was the kind of step change culturally, is that it ceased to be
the language of it, right? So I mean, what is it? The thrust of the speech that I heard on AI and the artist, there was this sort of really interesting references to how, you know, we're very resistant to new technology, even though we think we're not, and we think we're kind of like, you know, particularly in our world where we're sort of into synthesizers and software and all those kind of things, where this is all, I mean, a lot of it's new. If it's too new, then people don't like it because it's unfamiliar. But we're actually very much more resistant than perhaps we think to new technology, and that's got a lot of historical kind of references, right?
Yeah, I mean, we can be quite resistant to technology. I think AI in particular hits a lot of nerves for a lot of different reasons, artistically. I mean, to pick a few off the top of my head, the first one is AI is all stolen, right? You've got to train these networks on something, so you feed them loads of stuff. So you've got an image generator or a music generator. They are based on stuff that humans have made.
Yeah.
And so there's a kind of objection to this is a big machine that's stolen all this copyrighted work and no one's getting, you know, repaid for that, blah, 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 blah. That's one argument against it. The other one would be an eco argument. Right? Something like ChatGPT is incredibly expensive in terms of energy usage. But I think for me, the most fascinating one is just the kind of cultural reaction to AI as a creative force. People don't like it. A lot of people really don't like it, partially for the two reasons I mentioned, but also just fundamentally, we don't want the machine to take away our art jobs. Art feels like something special and human and creative. And so it's kind of ironic that those are the first up against the wall in the AI race was the visual artists. And, you know, I'm sure we'll get onto it, the musicians as well.
I suppose so. But then, I mean, ultimately, most of what we see and hear, I mean, for many people, there's a sort of party trick element to it. It's like, wow, that's impressive. But then on sort of closer inspection, if it's purely generated and there's very little sort of human, hasn't been modified perhaps or curated in any way, other than the person goes, hey, this is cool, check this out. The word slop is used a lot, and I think there's a sort of I think that's fair enough, but I think you could probably also lay that sort of thing at the door of something, technology like GarageBand, where you just throw a load of loops onto a thing and rap badly over it, and suddenly that's a thing. Is that any better? Is that different? What's different?
I mean, to stick with the music, it's arguable that techno, in its contemporary form, was driven by the fact that Cubase by default loops at 8 bars.
Right.
So the technology determines the way that you use the piece of software. So in that case, 8-bar loops are really easy to do in early Cubase. So techno became 8-bar based, right? And the art form became defined by the technology that produced it. In previous talks, I've talked about MIDI as another example, which is similar to AI. When MIDI arrived, there was a lot of flapping in the press about, oh my God, session musicians are dead. We're all going to be replaced by machines. It's all over. People are still making music, right? 50 years later, and MIDI is everywhere. But at the time,
well, I mean, home taping is killing music, and
sure.
Yes, you could go back long distances, I suppose.
Yeah, and the same, photography, right? Photography is going to kill painting. Blah blah blah. I think any disruptive technology is going to upset people, but it's very hard to put the genie back in the bottle, and I tend to be a little frustrated with the current narrative of stop scraping copyrighted works, put it all back. Let's be ethical. I think it's kind of done, unfortunately. I mean, there are efforts visually to use Creative Commons data sets to do it, but fundamentally, if your objection is this machine is stealing the efforts of humans, stealing the efforts of Creative Commons humans.
Yes, I think the key fact has been, at least, that since Suno came along and all these other kind of generative music things, that people have just been creating farms of AI stuff and claiming the copyright on those things.
Yeah.
So it's not a question of necessarily taking income. It's almost sort of generating income under false pretenses, which is sort of somewhat fraudulent. There was a case, wasn't there, quite recently, which I forget the jurisdiction in America, where they basically said you can't copyright AI generated stuff, which I think has been somewhat underreported, but that must make an enormous difference. But then you get to the point of but then it's down to the plaintiff proving that it was made by AI.
How much makes it AI generated, right? So yes, if I just typed words into Udio and said, make me a pop song, doesn't feel like I made much effort.
Yeah.
If I take that song, split it into its stems, pull out the bass line because I like it, and build another song around the outside, is that whole thing invalid because it contains an AI generated element? I mean, it's these are legal problems, but I think the gut instinct we have as consumers or artists is that feels like cheating. You haven't made enough effort.
Well, yeah, but that's been, gosh. Okay, let's go back to Trio and Da 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 with the Casio tone rhythm, and that was it, basically. Did they? That was a massive hit, and presumably that the backing, which was essentially just the Casio
VL tone, wasn't it? Yeah.
VL tone wasn't. They didn't get any royalties from that. You everything, I suppose, can be counter argued. It's just quantification of it to a degree.
I think it's the ease with which it's done, I think, and so prompting, writing 50 words in a text box and hitting a button, it doesn't feel like the same kind of creative process. It's more akin to conceptual art, but I don't think anyone who's on Udio is considering themselves using conceptual art.
I think the thing that I find with using the prompt-based stuff, where it's very powerful, the problem is if you're being very specific, I want this, and it does it, and it's not right, how do you then explain to it what's wrong? Because what I find, you tend to get into this loop where you go, no, not like that. And he goes, oh, yeah, I know what you mean. And you think, oh, great. The language it's used to reply to me means it probably knows. And you go, no, that's wrong too. And then you say, no, that's wrong. It needs to be more like this. And then it just goes back to the first thing. So you end up this sort of cyclical loop of the first thing that was wrong, the second thing that was wrong, and you just get all the third thing. And it just goes round and round and round. And it's,
So
I don't know how you break out of that.
So being a bit philosophical about it, in the entire history of humanity, we have only ever spoken to other humans. And so things that chat with us have always been humans. And so we make certain affordances. So I assume that you're a human, you assume I'm a human, even though we're on Zoom. We kind of assume that we're both made of the same stuff with the same idea. Now, suddenly there's these machines that you can talk to who behave very much like someone who's human, but they're not. And so we're throwing a lot of expectation on a machine that is inherently not like us. And so however powerful prompting is with text, it's not quite the same as chatting with a musician.
No, of course not. There's no intuit. There's the real-time intuition, and the modification is something that is irreplaceable. And not something. I mean, why would we want to make something powerful enough to be able to do that? I don't know. It seems like a weird sort of cultural idea. I know. Let's take all the things that society enjoys doing that gives people joy and find a machine to do it. It just seems very wrong. So
I don't think that I don't think that's the motivation. The motivation is from scientists saying, can we get a machine to learn stuff? What's a good domain to learn? Oh, there's loads of pictures on the internet. Let's start there. Oh, there's loads of books on the internet. Let's start there. So I don't think it's driven by an intention to deceive. It's driven by technology that then has enormous societal impacts that perhaps not expected. So I mean, I've played with these things for a long, long time, and I am less interested in AI generated art now than I was. Certainly the kind of mainstream prompting engines produce stuff that is instantly recognizable as AI. In fact, the models themselves tend to be a little more limited because they've been fine-tuned to make...
Well, and to make them cheaper to run and cheaper to generate, I suppose.
And so my initial excitement about things like VQGAN and stuff, which was like 5 years ago, was because this is amazing. I've never seen a machine make anything remotely as coherent as this. And now
then it just keeps doing the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah, and then, but that's it. So I think, this is where it comes into the parallels with music, I think, is that I like it when they're chaotic and wrong and unexpected and reveal something of the machine nature. And then something in that would excite me, and I'll take it off and do something else with it. Whereas now, I think as they get more accurate and more consistent, exactly what you're saying about this kind of iterative, am I going to get fine-tuned to exactly what... I don't think I've ever really approached it that way. I've never gone, okay, can I persuade a machine to make exactly this thing? It's more like, hey, machine, what do you think about this? Right. What are you finding when you dig into this strange cultural blob that you've been trained on?
Okay, well, I mean, how if we take it from a different angle, then, if we consider it to just be a tool like a randomizer might be in a MIDI sequencer or a patch generator in a synthesizer where you hit random and it comes up with something, do you think there's more of a fruitful approach to using it by sort of creating a starting point and giving you inspiration? Because it seems to me, I saw a couple of things where you'd said, I made this painting, a physical painting, but the kind of, I guess the study for it, the sketches, I used AI to sort of generate a starting point. I mean, I guess, is that sort of something that you think is much more of a valuable approach?
Well, in case of the painting, that was a reaction by me to seeing this stuff happen. Like, this is the most amazing thing I've ever seen. I would like it to exist outside of the screen, and I also would like it to play with it. So I could just print out a big print, right? That's one thing, but that's a bit lazy. But actually, the process of considering it, changing it, and what happens on the canvas while you're painting it is also part of the process. And it's the same. This is the same with music. I think if you are taking the output of video and posting it straight to Spotify, you're not doing very much, are you? But if you take the output and go, actually, that's an interesting riff, I'm going to play with it.
Yeah. I suppose the temptation is if you subscribe to one of those services and you just pour it out, and as we've seen, Spotify you can get monetarily awarded, and if you're training it on music that other people have written, I want it to be like this, then sometimes it can cause a problem with the person who created the original music, and that it gets claimed. It's actually, that's the terrifying stuff. But I suppose that's a legality issue, and that's a reason to be scared, a reason to maybe mistrust, I suppose.
Sure, and also Spotify have been out for a long time, so Spotify, even way before AI generated music have their own department for making whooshy ambient sounds that they will by default kick you to. If you're listening to Boards of Canada and you get to the end of the album, they will kick you to Spotify generated music, which is you can play in the background. And so why pay an artist when I can get a machine? And I imagine that Spotify are going to be very quickly doing exactly the same thing with.
Just going to take a quick pause there and have a word from our sponsor.
Life without reverb is flat, dry, lacking depth, space, and life. Until you dial it back in. Introducing Equinox, a premium immersive reverb for post and music production. Equinox combines legendary algorithmic reverb engines from Exponential Audio with cutting-edge iZotope technology, letting you quickly craft the depth that your projects need. With powerful and intuitive workflows and over 1,200 professional presets. Whether you're working in stereo, surround, or immersive formats, Equinox gives you the flexibility to add realistic space or take your reverb into new worlds with deep control and creative effects. Download a free trial or get it for yourself now at iZotope.com.
And we'd like to thank iZotope for sponsoring Sonic Talk. Now back to the show. Well, and I seem to recall a story some time ago. I mean, I'll have to check my sources, but that they were kind of commissioning library music as well in specific. So they're saying, well, these genres are particularly popular. Can we find someone who will just make us library music that we can then populate other? So it's a similar thing. It's just, I guess, cheaper than using library musicians.
Yeah, I mean. 100,000 tracks a day, isn't that right, on Spotify? Something like that.
Wow,
I mean, it's just insane. So I'm working on a new album at the moment, and so I did a little quick investigation of what is the best way to release a record in 2025. 4 TikToks a day is apparently the answer.
Wow, that's the specific answer.
Specific.
What did you ask? Yeah, but who did you ask? What did you ask?
This is me just looking at
research.
Reddit, music promotion channel, and it's quite fascinating because it's just horrific. Those of us who are a bit older who,
Jeez, that is it. I mean, when we think, of pressure, it can be quite pressurized for us to, come working to a deadline, but working to that kind of deadline is, and it all has, I can understand how some of these poor kids are sort of burning out and losing their minds, because that's just, I mean, I think that's the other thing, because creativity for many people, perhaps generally older, is a joy. It's an outlet. It's a feeling. It's a vibe. It's a kind of it's being in the flow state or whatever. The kind of the monetary and the artistic aspects afterwards. Traditionally, somebody else has dealt with those, and we've just sort of let them. But now we're, as independent artists, seems to be one of the only ways to kind of make it through.
And you have to do
pressure. It's insane. Yeah.
So I'm toying with the idea of building an automated promotional system.
Wow, that's interesting.
I mean, that's really interesting. I can't bring myself to post. I mean, I'm too flipping old for TikTok, right? There's no way I'm going to be posting to, hey kids, check out my studio. And that's not going to happen. But I think there's certainly potential for generating content and fighting the algorithm in its own terms and just fire and forget. So I'm toying with that for the next release of just a machine that will do it for me. It will post to Instagram. It will take little clips of videos or whatever and spit them out into the great pile of social media slop. I mean, it's horrific, but
yeah,
it's an experiment.
I guess the ultimate dilution, isn't it? It's just sort of ultimately we start with soup and we end up with gas, or something, or just nothing, So musically, I mean, I've listened to some of your stuff actually. There was You Bet was a very interesting piece. So you could tell that you craft your music. At least I'm assuming that you'll make it. But then the elements to You Bet. For those of you, I'll try and play a short clip in here so that it's got some context. But the vocals, it sounds like that's what you were kind of maybe leaning more heavily on the AI to create this sort of weird machine song, which is both fascinating and when accompanied by the visuals is somewhat disturbing as well, if you don't mind me saying so.
That's my trademark. So I actually, going back to music, was primarily a kind of reaction to what was happening in the visual AI space, in the sense that there was so much hate and so much terrible rubbish being generated. Once sort of DALL-E and Midjourney went overground and AI was kind of everywhere, I found it quite depressing. It was like, there's a bit of get off my lawn, this is mine, but also some of the worst people were involved, right? And just in terms of the quality of the art scene, it got really damaged. And so I'm like, I'm going to go back to what I love, which is tinkering with my computers to make music. And so that's what kind of drove me back into doing the Drass stuff. And in the case of You Bet, I've been playing with speech models quite a lot. So there are various neural networks now that will speak, text to speech, whatever. Also voice cloning. So you can feed it one singer and you can then take your vocal and turn it into another.
A Studio, we talked about that last week. I mean,
I think
they're actually surprisingly impressive now, aren't they? Yeah,
they're very impressive. So obviously the first thing is like, well, how do I break this? Is usually my first interest. And if you feed it non-vocal samples, it will still try and sing it.
Oh,
so
it's like when the skin comes off the Terminator, and suddenly you see the red eye and the sort of the stainless steel teeth and the sort of the horror beneath. I quite like the idea of that.
Exactly, and I think that's I guess partially because I've quite a lot of experience of it. Is that actually the edge of technology is always the most interesting part. And okay, this is a service where you can take your slightly bad vocals and turn them into a great soul singer. Fine, I have no interest in that. But what happens if you give it a breakbeat? It will try and sing the breakbeat, right? One of the tracks I'm working at the moment is based on Blackbird's song. So Blackbird singing, slowed down to a quarter speed, fed into a voice to AI conversion, and then the singer will try and sing what this Blackbird is trying to sing, and then taking pieces of that and building songs out of it. So it's using it as a kind of transforming engine, I guess.
That's a really, I think that gives me a certain sense of optimism, because certainly our audience, generally speaking, probably likes to think that they're very experimental with synthesizers, and they like to sort of mangle things and do things in unique ways. Maybe we just so far have sort of lacked the imagination to see those kind of opportunities that are being presented to us, I suppose. Our mindset just needs to shift a little to take advantage of it.
I think, broadly, because there's such a cultural push against all things AI and creativity at the moment, people don't necessarily think about it. I think people think, I'll just go to Suno or Udio and type in some words and get a song. AI can do a whole bunch of other interesting things. And one of the tracks I released a few years back was based on a speech synthesizer called Bark, which is incredibly unpredictable.
Right.
You'd give it some text and say, read this out, and you've no idea what voice you're going to get, what language, what accent. And that became kind of fascinating in itself, right? So, okay, well, actually, if I can throw text at this thing and I don't know what I'm going to get back, I don't know which kind of characterization it's going to be, gives you loads of ideas, right? It's just I see them as idea-making machines rather than...
Yeah, well, I think that's a healthy approach. It's like programming an FM synthesizer in the 1980s. You never know what's going to come out, I suppose. In a similar...
never what you expected.
But, okay, so I think philosophically, do you think part of the reason that as creative people we're quite insecure about it is we are essentially... Many of us, there are lots of creative people who are supremely confident in their abilities, and that's great. And it's lovely to see, and it's very impressive, Prince or whatever, just see someone who it just comes out of without almost any effort. Whereas for the rest of us, we're actually pretty creatively insecure. So in many ways, if we're sort of looking at AI coming up with something that someone might be perceiving better than what I can do, it flexes that imposter syndrome that many of us as artists and creative people feel. Yeah. So that's why we are maybe more resistant to it, because it's like, well, our tricks will get found out and shown to be ineffectual or just, nothing special.
Or just better, right? I can get an AI text machine to produce an image that is technically far better than I could paint myself. I'm a reasonably accomplished painter, but I'm not the best painter in the world, and I can get an AI machine to make a perfectly formed image that looks like a painting. It doesn't feel the same though. Like it's not mine. And I think getting involved is what makes it mine. And I think I guess it depends. In music, it depends
okay.
where you are.
I've got a parallel for you here. So I'm a movie producer, and I have an idea for a film, and I've got a lot of money, so I just kind of find a director, find a script writer, tell them what I want. They handle all of the stuff underneath, and I sort of go, yeah, that's great. Or can we just change this? Maybe we should ask, Laura Dern to play the lead role, or whoever, or Ivor Cutler. I'm going to throw that one in there because I saw that as a reference in one of your Choose Your Fighter video, and I just thought, yes, I remember Ivor Cutler. What a great kids got to watch. It's a very interesting, sort of quirky. But so, I mean, essentially, is that not a similar process, or am I being? Does it have more value? I suppose it has more value because the money has to be earned. People are earning money. They're earning a living. Just because it's not their idea doesn't mean that has any less value. They enhance it somehow.
Yeah, I mean, the obvious parallels are, you mentioned before, session musicians, right, who are brought in to play bass, or in the fine art, Damien Hirst, right? If you buy a Damien Hirst spot painting for 100,000 quid, he's not even touched it, right? He may not even looked at it.
That's common. That's a commonality across the old masters. They would set up schools,
exactly.
Right back to the. And that was another really interesting point about your sense of this sense of kind of doing it properly and for the right reasons. Whereas we look back in history, the great composers were all patrons, had patronage from kings and extremely wealthy merchants who could afford to get them to paint these things. It was, or they, so. Is that the right reason? I mean, they happened to be geniuses, but they would have had to be extremely careful about what they did and the references because they not only might they get turned down and not paid, but they might actually get beheaded. There's a lot of risk.
Yeah, and historically, you're completely correct. I mean, certainly paintings of rich people, paid for by rich people, into the stuff you're seeing in galleries, and. Even in music, right? Music is a very small number of people make the songs that we hear on the radio. Like it's kind of 1 or 2% of musicians will ever make any impact, right? And so 98% of them were working hard and getting nowhere. And it's the same true of visual arts. 98% of them are getting nowhere. And I think we are somewhat delusional that everyone is a magic special snowflake that deserves glory, because that's not how the world works. The world works on the best promoted thing that is the most palatable to the most number of people. Yeah. And I think that's partially a function of getting older and more cynical, is that I'm slightly less concerned about appearing on top of the pops than I was when I was 20. Yeah. But you know what I mean?
I do. I take your point, but I think many people, I mean, most of our audience are probably hobbyists, right? And so it's just the joy that AI is not going to change the joy that they will get or can get from playing a guitar or, designing synthesizers or just looping the 4-bar loop endlessly for a couple of nights. It doesn't matter.
Yeah. It's fun, and I think the key for me is that is an activity that is not happening online. You may be using a computer, but you're not constantly engaged with the doom scrolling endless necessity of what it is to be online now. And I think for me that's probably the direction of travel for art, is as a result of all the slop, which is only going to get worse. The internet is going to be so full of it in 6 months that people will actually crave seeing other humans, and they'll want to go and see some guy play his guitar in the pub as much as they'll want to go and see a Taylor Swift concert. And I think that's the nature of artistic expression, is it's about another human, right? And I think as a result of all the stuff that's happening on screens, people will hopefully start going back to seeing.
It is interesting, though. I mean, there's a guy called Rob Chapman who I just saw a video of his this morning. Where I mean, he's a very good guitar player. He used to do some reviews for us in the past. He went on to kind of design his own signature guitars and has been involved in manufacturing and retail. And we've just lost a couple of really big music stores in Europe and in the UK. And his question was really sort of, is it not that people don't want to play music? It's just they're more likely to be sitting on their phones and doing that. It's about attention grab. That because there are many young people who could probably be brilliant at playing a musical instrument, but perhaps they don't have the time allotment. That they don't have the space to kind of pick something up and noodle with it, because their time is taken up with interacting digitally with with stuff.
Or they're expecting a quick return. I think anyone who's picked up a
Yeah, I
guitar,
suppose.
it's actually quite hard, right?
Yeah, I know, I agree. Yeah, that's
so
the point. But then,
right, I mean, maybe the other thing is like, oh, I've picked up a guitar, I've learnt 3 chords. Quick, I better record myself and put it on Instagram and
that
see if
didn't
anyone
go very
likes
well.
it. And someone goes, "Oh, you're rubbish," and you put the guitar down, right? This kind of feedback from the great social machine.
Yeah, I guess.
It's, I think, also, it's a bit of both.
But that's an interesting point, because ultimately that is what drives many artists and creative people, isn't it? It's like peer approval, or some weird parental thing, or an auntie or an uncle that said you'd never amount to anything, so you're constantly trying to prove yourself. All it does is shorten the gaps between. It's like, I've been working on this for 5 years. I think it's amazing. It's like, well, I spent 5 minutes and I'm busy, so therefore, that's an interesting thought.
I mean, I was saying, looking into what's the best way to release music in 2025. Waterfall releases, apparently a big thing. I'm sure you've come across that. So you release
one song,
you add it to the same number, same code number, so you effectively build your album. And the advice is, you've got 10 tracks in your album, it's going to take you 10 months. Release 1 track, spend a month promoting it with your 4 TikToks a day, then release track 2. I'm like, Jesus, I'm not going to spend 10 months every day promoting something that I wrote last year. I just don't have the energy for it. So hence the idea of maybe we get machines to do it.
There's got to be other ways to, so you just go, well, there's maybe 3 or 4 tracks I do want to promote, like they would be singles in the olden days, and the rest would be filler, and I'll go, here's another 2 tracks, or here's another 3 tracks.
Yeah.
So there's probably granularity, granularity.
But that comes out of trying to game the algorithm, right? So if you want to be in Spotify's radar, you have to release a new track. So if you release an album, you've only got 1 track that's got a chance of going in the it's all horrible nonsense, but bring back the days of cocaine and record companies with big advances. But unfortunately, those days are gone, I think, and so I don't think it's always been hard to make money in music. Or anything.
Yeah, but I think, like I said, my previous point is people do it because they enjoy it. And the thing that I find is when you go to a gig, I went to a gig, we have a guy who's involved with Sonic quite a lot, a guy called Gaz. He played a gig at a local pub on Saturday. I said, I'm going to go down and see it. And everybody who went, it was literally, they're fantastic musicians. Gaz is a brilliant performer. And it was just watching 4 people emanating joy with great skill from a stage in a sweaty pub. And it was absolutely brilliant. And people... One of the threads of conversation was, I've never seen anybody that like this, who's this accomplished. And it's just, it used to be very common. So this experience a thing in a room with a bunch of people at the same time is a very powerful thing that we've sort of come to. Society's designed it's designed out of our everyday experience, and we need to bring that back.
It depends where you are. So, I mean, I'm very lucky being in Brighton, which is a very vibrant music scene. And I go to a lot of gigs, and they're almost inevitably bands I know nothing about. Look interesting. And, standing in a room full of 20-year-olds, enjoying a live gig. I love anyone who's willing to step on stage and give it a try. Yeah. But that's not necessarily true if you go outside of major music venues. Like the actual chance of seeing live is pretty limited.
It used to be wide. It used to be wider. It's becoming less and less so because of the
And the other side, of course, is it's really expensive if you want to see a mainstream band. My kids are really keen to see Nine Inch Nails, which I saw in 1990, but they're coming back, and it's 120 quid a ticket for the O2. So that would have cost me 360 quid to go and see this band. I'm like, I'm not going to pay that, right? However much I love them, that's just an insane barrier to entry. And so I think the music that people know is being played in big venues for ridiculous ticket prices, whereas the guy in the pub is not as visible as it is.
Just going to take a quick break, and we'll be back after this.
I know right away when it's good for me because it makes me write something.
Komplete 50, a do-it-all production bundle for endless sonic inspiration. I did not know it could do that.
You have your low sounds, you have your mid sounds, you have your high sounds.
Create any sound imaginable.
All together, sounds nice and big.
Whatever sound your music needs, make it with Komplete 50. Okay, well, bringing it back to AI again, one thing I'm curious about, do you think we're very far away from this sort of the ability to be using it in real time in terms of performance? I was talking to a guy called Dimitri from Immute Labs, who's a Brighton guy, and they built a module which for live coding, which is live. And I was thinking, well, what happens if you hook that up to something like ChatGPT and you sang into it your lyric, which was describing the music that you wanted to then play afterwards? You know, those are and as just an example of how you might be able to use this stuff live. Have you been looking into that sort of thing, real-time collaborative stuff?
Visually, it's definitely doable now. So some of the more recent models, like Flux Schnell, is incredibly fast at generating images, to the point where you can generate images, 20 times a second, which is fast enough for it to be effectively real time. So I was involved in a gig recently where people were using it live and with a camera on stage and pointing it, and then AI generating the visuals based on what it sees. And like, it's just beginning to happen close enough to real time for it to be a thing visually. Music is much harder, right? Because of timing, right? It's that to transform something in real time is quite hard because of latency and compute. So I think there are ways you can use it, but in terms of generating whole songs on the fly, I'm not sure we're quite there yet. And who would want it? I mean, I don't think I'd go to a live gig where someone was.
Well, I suppose a range of keyboards, where you're sort of working in advance over the next sort of bars, we might start seeing that sort of technology turning up in those. But there was also, we did a video with something called the Pulse, which has a loads of sort of not algorithmic but machine stuff, so arpeggiators and cyclical functions and things that respond to the notes that you're playing into it and what the root note is and whether the high note is going to be treated different. Those are the sort of things that I suppose. And then I mean, it's hard to compete with Beardy Man, for instance, because he can do that in real time. So, but that would be
But I mean, I think the other end of it is as you touched on, the live coding scene, which we have not seen much of recently, but certainly about a decade ago was a big deal. People using is it Sonic Pi and other live coding languages. So you go to gigs and it's just a projection of code, and people are live changing the code, and then the music is changing around them. That was quite a scene. Algo rave, they used to call it. Yeah.
Algorave. Sounds like a sort of nutritious drink, doesn't it? Perhaps.
Yeah. I mean, it attracted a lot of people who wore backpacks and were into code, but it was a thing, and I think that kind of it's a bit niche, right? Like, so
yes,
what excites you about live music is the guy playing the guitar in the pub. Look at him; he can play well.
What's the equivalent of the foot on the monitor and the kind of that note in
exactly.
live coding? I don't know. Yeah.
In the live coding, it's the dynamic of, the music is good, and I can see how this work that you're doing on stage is affecting it, but it requires a degree of knowledge that your average gig goer doesn't have. And so I think maybe in the studio there's going to be a lot more activity. Certainly in terms of we talked about FM synthesizers. You can get AI synthesizers, right, that have the whole landscape of sound, and you can move to a different spot and say, I want to play that thing that sounds a bit like a duck call and a bit like a triangle, right? Yeah. That kind of stuff, like just the sort of exploratory new ways of making waveforms. Whether that is an exciting live experience, I'm not sure.
I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, as you say, foot on the monitor, flying V is what people kind of want, right?
Yeah, to a degree, although guitar sales are down quite a lot, which is interesting. I mean, because that's probably the easiest thing to get in. Well, easiest thing to get into in terms of you can pick one up and you don't need much other stuff. But I suppose it's not the easiest thing to learn how to play effectively, particularly now that many of the guitars that we hear playing or that we hear is generally heavily treated or heavily sonically enhanced so that to get that sound is, it's a bit more of an expenditure. Whereas maybe synthesizers and software is going to be easy to get hold of. So what's next for you? Where's your kind of meandering point of interest? What's coming up?
So at the moment, I am working on a concept album about aliens and telepathy. Okay. And been integrating a lot of some of this AI vocal stuff into that. And also, I mean, practically speaking, a bit of keeping your head down in the world of AI. It's like I know enough about it to know that it's going to take a while for culture to adapt to it. And so whatever is new and exciting now is not going to be accepted by the mainstream. Probably
it's a bit like naming your presets by genres of music on keyboards, and it's like 5 years later, it's like, ooh,
yeah.
maybe, yeah.
And so I think there's quite a strong knee-jerk anti-AI stuff vibe, particularly visually and video-wise. So I tinker with it, but I'm kind of less excited by it now than I was 5 years ago, which is ironic. I think I'm still excited when I can find a thing that I can bend, like circuit bend. So this thing of taking a sound and putting it through a vocalizer, and that's exciting. But I don't know if you've seen the latest Refusion stuff. The Refusion has had a whole bunch of upgrades recently that allows you to very subtly change and remix and extract stems, and it's much more like a kind of proper production workflow. And I can see that being interesting, but fundamentally, any machine learning system is deriving its knowledge from statistical regularities. So if you play it loads of Elvis, it will sound more like Elvis. If you play it everything in the world, it will sound like generic pop music. So by definition, any system that is looking at a large volume of data is going to have a tendency towards the norm. And whereas art is generally the edge, right? I want to see something I haven't seen before. I want to hear something I haven't heard before. So I still have pleasure kind of coercing them into a direction they may not be comfortable with and seeing what they spit out. But as they get better at doing the thing they're supposed to do, they're kind of less interesting to me.
And I think that's probably something subconsciously that we all feel, because we hear the genericism of, if that's even a word, of stuff, and the slop and the sheer volume of it. So it sort of turns you off it after a while, and you just think,
Yeah.
And what's bizarre is pop music has become more machine-like, sort of even outside of the rise of AI and machine learning. The roboticism of vocals, the tuning, the perfection, this kind of non-human elements of it. And yet I've spoken to sort of various producers who, even though they're using the latest techniques to make the vocalist sound like it's a robot, they still go back to when we recorded that session, it was just really off the cuff, and it was just an SM58, and we're all vibing in the room, and it was a real thing. Yet it's been sort of turned in. It's really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think, mate, I'm spitballing here, but I suspect that the generation of kids who've just come through COVID are inherently reticent about live activity. And I think maybe we're kind of seeing that bump now. The kids who would be going out and playing in the pub don't, because they're on their phones, right? And they're, SoundCloud rappers just punching another line. It's a different kind of music making experience now, and it's less based on live chops, I think.
But I think you're right, though. I think it'll come back. I think we sort of crave that sort of thing, in the way that we kind of crave nature that we maybe don't realise, but when we're in it, we think, oh wow, this is great. I should do this more often.
The anti-reaction to AI slop is good and right. I don't want my artistic activity to be reduced to button pushing, but capitalism demands product, right? And I think in the internet, it's like. And unfortunately, the disruption is definitely coming. It's already happening with AI, but it's not quite in the dramatic way that people fear. So it's not going to be this company sacked 5,000 people and replaced them with AI. It's going to be this company just stopped hiring people. And when people naturally retire or move on, they don't get replaced. So it's going to be insidious shift. And as a parent, it's the poor kids, right? Where's the first time job? If your first time job was, I'm going to make logos for this beer company, that's been taken away by AI, right? Or I'm going to
yes, I suppose.
So the entry level stuff is also been destroyed, and people aren't as visible there.
But I suppose also, kids are smart, and they'll figure out how to use the tools to subvert them and to do weird stuff as well. I'd like to end on a positive note if I possibly can. So that
I didn't know we were getting to the end. Let's get positive.
It feels like we're naturally sort of heading to that point, and hence, so you're working on an album, and have you decided what you're going to do in terms of release? Are you thinking traditional releases, or are you going to go for the waterfall and the 4 TikToks a day approach? If you can bring yourself to do that.
It's an interesting artistic project of its own to build an algo record company. Can I code up a machine that does the work, or most of the work, of what I expect a company to do, which is writing press releases, sending shit out to the socials at the right time to the right people, maybe even kind of horrific A/B testing. I mean, it's all awful. But kind of inevitable.
It's not, because doing that stuff manually is awful. So that's what AI should be doing, the hoovering. It should be doing jobs like that. It should be doing that kind of thing. The thing that is tedious and nobody really wants to do, maybe as an artist, or can't afford to pay an agency to do. I don't know. Maybe that's the answer.
But, I think I think human creativity is impossible to extinguish. It's just getting a bit of a kick at the moment, right? In terms of exactly what you say. It's like, well, I could make this thing and spend, a couple of days in my studio crafting this beautiful little song. Meanwhile, someone's going to have typed in to Udio and made 10,000 songs. That feels like a blow, right?
I think most of us, ultimately, as well as the ego, we're also really into process, and we enjoy immersing ourselves into stuff, and that stuff was not going to go away. So I think that's maybe the positive. That's a positive. That's a positive thing to say.
So my positive thing is, if much like taking your guitar pedal apart and poking it a bit, that's where AI is the most powerful. It's like getting it to do the things that it doesn't want to do naturally, because what it wants to do naturally is sound like everyone else. So if you poke it in the right way, it can make something new and exciting, but it requires a bit of work. And so
it's just a slightly different set of creative muscles to exercise when you're thinking about how to, which is what we all do with technology anyway. It's like, how can I coerce this modular system into making a sound like a duck, or whatever it may be?
Absolutely. I musically do a lot of my work, say, mess with a neural network to get a range of sounds, and then I'll bring it back into Audacity and stretch it and mess with it, and take it through a whole other set of processes. It's just a bit of source material. It's not a finished product, and I think the pushback is the AI making a finished product.
Yeah, we don't need that necessarily.
We don't need that. People don't want it.
Eric, thank you so much for talking to us. It's been fascinating. I mean, I'm looking forward to seeing what's next, and do let us know when your album's out.
I will.
And we'll keep an eye out.
It'll be all over TikTok.
Thanks very much.
Cheers.
We're just going to play out with a piece called Blackbird from Eric, which is a work in progress, which, as he discussed, using a Blackbird song slowed down and trying to train voices to sing like that and using it in music. Very interesting stuff. Thanks for watching. See you next time.